Canada is a failed society. I never thought I would say those words because this country is my home. This is the country that taught me how to think critically. I'd give my life to this country. It taught me so much. I'm so glad to be called our neighbors up north between the US. But after today's results, it just made me realize it's no longer the government. It's us. So, I'm going to be talking about a lot of stuff that happened. So, if my mind just goes off, do apologize. But I'm pretty sure that from the points that I make today, some of you might not agree, some of you might agree. Some of you might want to find my address, dox me, and do whatever. But I like to believe that we live in a free country. But maybe, you know what, after today, maybe not after all. Maybe we don't live in a free country after all. So, one of the things I wanted to talk about is there was a high voter turnout in this time's election. And that's very surprising because throughout the course of time, Canadians tend to vote people out. They don't really vote people in. So when there was a high voter turnout, it was assumed that the opposite party, which is the Conservative Party, was going to win. Because normally, statistically speaking, when there is a high voter turnout in democratic elections, that is usually an indicator of a revolutionary shift, meaning there's finally going to be some astronomical changes within the government, right? But this is what I don't understand. There was a high voter turnout. In fact, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was like record breaking or something, where they had high voter turnout since, you know, like the 80s or something like that. But the same party won by quite a margin. How does that make sense? If there was a high voter turnout, and usually it's an indicator that there's a change coming, it's safe to assume that the Conservatives would have won. However, correlation is not causation. So even though there was a high voter turnout, that could have also just meant people came out to vote. Simple as that, right? But the reason why I can't make sense to this is because if there was a high voter turnout this time, this was record breaking or whatever, this also meant that people had a high voter turnout in voting for the same party. We've had 8 years of the Liberal government failing. And this time around, there was a high voter turnaround, yet the Liberals won by quite a margin still. So people who don't normally vote decided to vote for the Liberals, which is the government that failed us for the last 8 years. That's interesting. Another point I wanted to mention is that most Canadians they don't really want change. How they don't really want change. What they want is they want change in leadership, not policy. It's kind of like that saying that goes, it's not what you say, it's how you say it. You know, they want change in the Liberal government, but they don't want actual change in policy and governance and improving how the country goes. A lot of people tend to forget that Mark Carney was Trudeau's dog during Trudeau's cabinet. People seem to forget that right off the bat. It really baffles me how much of a goldfish memory some people have. You know, this election just proved that Canada at its core is socialist and doesn't encourage entrepreneurship. Right? This is the only reason as to why I can rationalize people voting for the Liberals. Because everything the Liberal government stands for is everything that small business owners, farmers, blue collar workers, entrepreneurs stand for, right? You can track where the finances go. All business owners in Canada have moved elsewhere. They've either moved their business to Dubai, to the US. Some operate in Eastern Europe, Southeast Asia as their headquarters, and they deal with US dollars. not Canadian dollars. You know, and I was talking to my mentor Victor today. He told me that it's easier to work with Americans. Canadian clients were the hardest to deal with because they were so afraid or conservative about doing business. They don't have that just do it mentality when it comes to doing business. As a client, not even as a business owner, as a consumer, they have that mindset already. Another point I wanted to talk about as well is that, you can call this right time, wrong place, wrong time, like wrong place, wrong time, whatever the fuck you want to call it, right? But when the Conservative Party was running its campaign for the last month, Trump was bashing Canada. And honestly, rightly so, just because we were suffering for so long. But I think what that did was a lot of the brain dead Canadians automatically associated the Conservative Party as very Trump like or very right wing during the campaign. And Canadians, for the most part, do not like Trump at all because of what he's doing with tariffs and whatever. That's one of the things I wanted to mention, because people don't vote based on substance, they vote based on the surface, right? Oh, Conservative Party, oh, right wing, Trump. Okay, we won't vote for him. It is so stupid. Okay, speaking of the Conservative Party, I have my thoughts on them too. In short, the Conservative Party blew a 3-1 lead, like how Golden State blew a 3-1 lead against Cavaliers. That is exactly how it went. They were the favorites in the previous months. But in my opinion, I don't think all of us are to blame for this. I think the government also has some responsibility in this, more specifically the Conservatives, because when you are the red team, A side, the favorites, you have to utilize that momentum. You can ask any individual in any field, athlete, business owner, anything. They will all tell you that when you have momentum, it's important to build on that and keep riding that, because that momentum rarely comes. And once you pick up that rhythm, it's go time and it's going to work in your favor. It's the natural pendulum swinging towards you. And if you don't utilize it, you can miss a great big opportunity. And in my opinion, I think that is exactly what happened. Pierre Poilievre could have gone on Nelk, Joe Rogan, Patrick Bet-David. In fact, Patrick Bet-David was inviting Pierre, insisted the Canadian people to tell Pierre to do an interview with him. But there were no replies from the Conservative Party. I wonder why. And the only podcast that I saw that Pierre did was with Jordan Peterson. And I love Jordan Peterson and everything he stands for the most part. But going to his podcast alone was not enough, especially how much of an impact it would make towards the masses. If you were going to go to that podcast realm and spread the message of how things are going to change in Canada, you might as well go all the way in. Why just go to one podcast? Go to all. That was Barron Trump's strategy for his dad. And that's crazy because a college kid outsmarted pretty much 90% of all the marketing politicians in the world. They simply got comfortable and stayed stagnant. That is exactly what happened. Most of the Canadians that want change acknowledge that it's impossible, so they just leave to the US. That's what I think. They leave to either Texas, Florida, Tennessee, those areas. And honestly, if I were, in a much better financial situation, I would too. Maybe in the future, who knows? I don't know. But not only has Canada failed, guys, but it has failed the United States as well. Do you know how many Americans were rooting for our redemption? It's not even funny. Shit is so fucking bad here when our neighbors down south is cheering for us. Because most of the time, it's always trash talking and friendly banter, right? We love each other, but it's always, that friendly brotherly trash talk. Right. And they rarely show like genuine affection because, it's always all in good sport. But when people are genuinely, like when Americans are genuinely pouring their hearts out, saying, we want you guys to win, we want you guys to be saved, that's when we desperately need it. And we still do. but I think it's too late. I don't know. Canada had 8 years to feel the damage and all the bullshit that the liberals have done to this country. And yet people are so delusional to think that no change is needed and everything is fine. Going back to the point earlier about how, some people think conservatives are like, racist, misogynistic, and they just associate conservatives with like right wing extremism, which is not the case at all. If you look at modern day conservatism, it's essentially what liberals and Democrats fought for in the 80s, which also means common sense has become uncommon. That's pretty much how I look at it. If the masses of the Canadian people are socialists, just come out and fucking admit it. At least we'll respect you more. You know, all in all, guys, the fall of Canada has been orchestrated cleverly by the puppet masters behind the scenes. And it's all part of their big plan, guys. What is that big plan? I'll mention that in another video because that's a very, very, very long-winded video. But I just wanted to share my thoughts here because I was one of the people that still believe that there could be hope in this country because our neighbors down south did it. And if they could do it, we could too. But clearly not. I don't know what the future holds for this country. All I know is now more than ever, I need to fucking make it.